Okay. We are talking about trusting the next generation. And this story will lead us into that, but it will be kind of a mystery how it talks about trusting the next generation. But, it's really clear that, God's heart, he speaks about, children be taught of love and caring, comforting, connected God. And that it says they'll grow up to be fully grown plants, alive and vital and flexible. And that's what you want, them to be blessed and they'll prosper and they'll raise up and bless you. And so I didn't realize I get to kind of preach to kid at the same time I'm saying this. But just that children are a gift, it says. And, I've heard people, I was with my doctor yesterday and he said, now I got to be a grandparent. I raised them and all that. And I said, he's a friend too. I said, oh, be still. I said, you like it. I said, all right, I like it. So Jed is going to share a story from this infamous or famous book. I hope it's not hereditary, where I'm talking about him. The dog, he got a hold of it. So, no, he asked me to write a book and then told me I'm going to name it. I hope it's not hereditary. The mostly true stories of my father, Bob Hartley.
Well, and this chapter that we're going to read is the first chapter I ever wrote.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this was chapters 3, 4, and 5. Hey, Kevin.
Just doing a little filming. Come on.
Chapters 3, 4, and 5 are the 3 chapters that I wrote and then sent to the publishers that got them interested. Yeah.
Wow, that is excellent, man.
So I was 21, I think, when I wrote.
Jed was 11 when he wrote this.
Well,
so he's
sometimes.
An astronaut now. I mean, he goes out to your theoretical places.
It has been almost a decade since I started writing this.
You're 40?
Worried about that math.
You're worried I'll play in chess later.
Yeah.
And I'll use the Scandinavian opening.
Scandinavian defense is what it's called.
That's what I was meant to, yeah. I use it as an opening. That's how far advanced I am. Okay, go for it.
Robert Hartley, or Bobby, as he was often called by his family, was born to John and Ann Hartley on August 12, 1957.
Kevin, you gotta hear this, man.
In Menorah Medical Center. A frantic 20-minute drive from their home in Raytown, Missouri. Just a month after Bob's first birthday, a tornado ripped through their town, destroying several homes and buildings. It hit Ruskin, a local high school, demolishing most of the facility, even tearing the S and K off of the school sign, leaving it to read Ruin High School. The Hartleys were living in a little one-story ranch house at the time. Yeah.
It was amazing, but...
The Ruin High School? Yeah.
Yeah, but it was rebuilt better. So now it's named Better High School.
Is it really?
No, it's Ruskin.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I had you, man. It's back like you were in the bed. Yeah. And I tell you, it's the school time. Because you got to watch that other one. It's good. Okay.
The Hartleys were living in a little one-story ranch house at the time. Just before the tornado hit, Ann and John had to rush their family to a neighbor's house for shelter. After the tornado, John promptly moved his family to a new house in St. Catherine's Gardens, where the family lived for the next 15 years. And where you just moved back. Well, not now, but you just recently. You were moved
back to St. Catherine's Gardens.
Yeah. The Hartleys, a big family with a rambunctious children possessing large social appetites, fit well inside St. Catherine's Gardens.
I love that. The rambunctious children possessing large social appetites. We're out all the time playing, with people. Yes.
St. Catherine's was full of big Catholic families crawling with young kids. Bobby grew up with something fun to do at every moment and plenty of opportunities to get in trouble. He was a stocky little boy gifted with an insatiable hunger for mischief and adventure. Early in middle school, Bobby was appropriately nicknamed Bulldog Bob by his peers. The nickname fit him well. He was small but tough, and what he lacked in size, he made up for in pure aggression. He would pick fights with kids who severely outmatched him, and as much as his father and mother tried to train him, his domestication was a lost hope. St. Catherine's Gardens was so full of large families, several buses were required to
You
collect.
said pick 5. I thought you said 5 kids who he severely outmatched. And I thought, that's my son. No, I picked kids who severely outmatched me. And that was it. No, I wasn't. So go ahead.
He always enjoyed the bus rides, partly because he was a social butterfly, and cramming that many of his friends onto a one bus was a dream come true, but chiefly because of Billy. Billy was the neighborhood kid who collected rotten bananas and threw them at the bus as it drove by.
Billy Allgaier.
Bobby never quite figured out how Billy was able to amass such a large quantity of bananas, but somehow he did. Without fail, he would attack the bus every morning with an onslaught of sloppy mush. He never got caught because he strategically varied his point of attack, never hiding in one place too often and always having an open escape route. However, Billy probably didn't even need such a level of strategic ingenuity. The bus lady was a short, hefty woman who, despite her best efforts, could never waddle fast enough to catch him. The bus ride was about the only aspect of school that Bobby actually enjoyed. His school was tightly structured and emphasized the use of firm discipline. Many of the teachers maintained a strict set of rules in the classroom and took pride in being feared by the students. The most feared of all these teachers was Mr. Freed. Just the mention of his name sent chills down the spine of even the toughest students. The embodiment of the no-nonsense Catholic school he attended on Sundays, or Catholic church he attended on Sundays, Mr. Freed stood 6 feet 3 inches tall with a thin, wiry frame, with a religiously well-tamed haircut, and the shaven face of a drill sergeant, and the wild, untamed eyebrows of a mad scientist.
That's it, man.
With a piercing stare, an unflinching moral code, and a petrifying Machiavellian demeanor, Mr. Freed ruled his classroom all too effectively. At lunch, students would murmur in hushed tones horror stories about the dreaded Mr. Freed. I heard a couple years back he got a kid expelled just for giving him a funny look, one student shared. Another chimed in, I heard he gives swats so bad you can't sit down for a month. It was a day and age when the punishment for misbehavior was direct, and no one was more direct than Mr. Freed. If you misbehaved in his class, rather than notifying your parents, Mr. Freed dished out punishment himself. An avid golfer and 3-time college arm wrestling champion, Mr. Freed's swats had reached a level of infamy among the students. No one dared cross him, for no student was gutsy or foolish enough to do so. No one, that is, except for Bobby Harley. It was 3 weeks into Bobby's 6th grade year when he first got the idea to tie Mr. Freed's shoelaces to the desk. You see, every Friday, Mr. Freed would end class with snippets of educational films. Robotic in more ways than one, Mr. Freed would systematically pull the projector out, start the reel, sit back in his chair, kick up his legs onto the desk, and fall asleep. Like clockwork, Mr. Freed would wake up just as the reel was winding down, and then dismiss the class. It was a bold and vulnerable move to fall asleep among a class of ornery preteens, but similar to a bear during hibernation, Mr. Freed slept without any touch of trepidation, knowing no one would dare wake him. Bobby figured he could silently sneak up on Mr. Freed while he was asleep and tie his shoelaces to the desk, then crawl back to his chair, and when Mr. Freed woke up, enjoy the spectacle of the whole class laughing as their mighty and terrifying teacher struggled to get to his feet. There was no thought of repercussions or any extrapolation of possible negative outcomes in Bobby's mind. His thought process began and ended with the temptation of besting Mr. Freed. Bobby dispatched rumors of his audacious scheme among his friends and fellow students. Anticipation swelled, and each Friday, a great number of his classmates would fixate their attention on Bobby as Mr. Freed fell asleep. Several Fridays came and went, and Bobby still had not accomplished his daring feat. Some students speculated that Bobby had lost his nerve, but cool as a cucumber, Bobby was just too dumb to be afraid. Instead, an intuitive entertainer, he knew that each week he waited, his class only increased in anticipation. By the 5th Friday, the tension had reached a pinnacle. Bobby listened to the constant whir of the projector mixed in with the rumble of Mr. Freed snoring. Bobby leaned over and whispered to his best friend, Mike O'Hara, "It's time. I'm gonna do it." O'Hara, a couple years wiser than Bobby, shook his head and tried to talk some sense into his foolish friend. "No, don't do it. You'll regret it." But it was too late. Bobby had already dropped to his knees beneath his desk and begun to scurry towards his target. As Bobby inched closer, beads of sweat began to percolate on his brow and slide down his face. The class brimmed with suspense as Bobby slowly rose up and began to untie Mr. Freed's shoelaces. He imagined Mr. Freed struggling with his laces while the whole class broke into hysterical laughter. He suppressed a snicker as he draped the loose laces over the front bar of the desk and tied them into the best sailor's knot he could manage. As he dropped back to the ground and Army crawled to his desk, the class was silent. He could sense the silent ovation that emanated from his awestruck peers. He slid up into his chair and gave a nod to O'Hara, which basically said, "Yeah, aren't you glad to know me?" O'Hara glanced toward Mr. Freed, then back at Bobby. "Bobby, what if he falls over? He could really get hurt." Bobby hadn't considered that Mr. Freed could actually topple over, and the notion certainly gave him pause. But he quickly shrugged it off, dismissing O'Hara's fears. But O'Hara continued, "He's going to know it was you. The whole class saw you do it. Someone's bound to tell." Bobby hadn't thought of this either. Panic enveloped him as he began to take into account the consequences of his actions. Of course someone would tell on him. Mr. Freed could make a kid crack without even looking at him. Bobby glanced at the projector. The reel of the film was getting dangerously low, but there was still time. Bobby dropped to his knees and scurried back towards Mr. Freed's desk. "What are you doing?" O'Hara questioned. "I have to untie them. If he finds out it was me, I'm dead," Bobby responded. Bobby reached Mr. Freed's desk, grabbed the laces, and with far less stealth and composure than before, began to untie the shoelaces. He struggled with the knot, cursing himself for how tight he had tied it. He hadn't noticed it before, but Bobby began to realize that Mr. Freed's snoring sounded much more like growling than actual snoring. In desperation, Bobby yanked at the knot, when all of a sudden, the reel of the film began to click. The film was moments away from finishing. Mr. Freed stirred and dropped his feet beneath the desk. Bobby looked in horror at Mr. Freed's dangling feet. Once again, he tried to pull at the knot, but it was no use. When Mr. Freed dropped his feet, the knot had pulled taut. Bobby looked desperately around the classroom.
I feel this, man. You captured this, man.
"Someone give me scissors," he whispered. Dozens of students ripped open their desks and rifled through their stuff, looking for scissors. But it was too late. Mr. Freed lifted his hands and began to rub his eyes. He was waking up. For the fourth and final time, Bobby dropped to the ground and began to crawl away. He made it halfway back to his desk when all of a sudden he heard a crash. Boom! Mr. Freed fell over. His desk collapsed in a heap on top of the floor.
It was more like boom, 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 because he was skipping across the floor.
Papers flew across the room, contrary to the way he originally imagined it. There was no peals of laughter from the class, only stunned, terrifying silence. Bobby slowly looked over his shoulder at Mr. Freed to assess the damage. The teacher lay on his side with his head propped up with his head propped up on his arm, staring straight at Bobby. "Mr. Hartley," Mr. Freed said coolly. "I'm just looking for my pencil, Mr. Freed. I'm just looking for my pencil," Bobby desperately tried to explain. "Swats." The word struck Bobby like a judge's gavel. The bell rang and Bobby bolted out the door, across the road, and kept running all the way home. That was the longest week of Bobby's life. Saturday morning, he dragged himself out of bed only to collapse on the floor in a heap, burdened by the immeasurable weight.
Longest weekend.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Go ahead.
Is that what it said?
Week.
Oh, yeah, weekend. Burdened by the immeasurable weight of his dread and self-pity. In actuality, his current state stemmed more from his overly melodramatic personality than actual fear of ensuing punishment. Undoubtedly, Bobby was more affected by his failure than by his punishment. He had set out to best Mr. Freed, and he had failed miserably. Instead of inspiring awe among his classmates, he had only invoked pity. After an hour of wallowing, Bobby eventually pulled out his journal. If there were to be If this were to be his last couple of days on Earth, there were a few things he needed to address. He began to scribble down his last will and testament. This didn't take long, considering he was 12 and the only real possessions he had was a stack of Mad magazines. It was shaping up to be a dark day for Bobby, and it would have remained that way if it weren't for O'Hara. Knowing his friend would be in need of a good distraction, O'Hara showed up at Bobby's front door that morning and invited him to a local high school football game. Bobby was hesitant at first, but he reluctantly agreed. During the game, O'Hara did his best to dig Bobby out of his dismal mood. "How about a hot dog? I brought mayonnaise," O'Hara said, as he pulled a handful of Miracle Whip packets from his coat pocket.
Heaven.
Normally, these were the guaranteed ingredients to cheer up Bobby, but even a greasy hot dog with an excess of packaged mayo was not enough to change his mood. Still, it wasn't like he was going to pass up a free hot dog. Bobby forced his best smile and nodded to O'Hara in approval. As O'Hara left for the school's concession stand, Bobby noticed Steve Van Hooky sitting on the other side of the bleachers. Van Hooky, who lived a couple blocks over, was the biggest, meanest kid Bobby had ever met. With his black leather jacket, hair slicked back, and with a pound of Crisco, and a package of cigarettes rolled up in his sleeves, Steve knew all about being tough. Normally, Bobby would head in the opposite direction whenever he saw Van Hooky. The kid walked around with something to prove and would leap at the slightest opportunity for a fight. But stupidity has a greedy appetite. The more you feed it, the hungrier it gets, and Bobby had been slipping his stupidity extra portions for far too long. Maybe it was because he was feeling the need to prove himself after the previous day's failure, or perhaps because his obnoxiousness was the only way he could cheer himself up.
That was it.
But for whatever reason, Bobby snuck up behind Van Hooky and prepared to pounce. With a couple of hot dogs in his hand, O'Hara turned the corner and paused, perplexed when he saw Bobby crouching behind the meanest kid in the city. What was Bobby planning? "Hey, Van Hooky!" Bobby screamed at the top of his lungs. Van Hooky, shocked, dropped the cigarette he had just lit. Then, with all the might his 12-year-old body could muster, Bobby slapped his hands on Van Hooky's ears. Bobby scampered down the bleachers, roaring with laughter as Van Hooky toppled off his seat and plane. It took a couple of seconds for Van Hooky to recover, but when he did, he bolted up and tore after Bobby with a vengeful ferocity. Without a moment's hesitation, Bobby leapt over the guardrail and onto the field in the middle of the football game. He weaved through the players and across the field. Hot on his tail, Van Hooky barreled his way through the team, tossing kids aside like pillows. Bobby cleared the visitors' bench and darted across the parking lot. Due to a surge of pure adrenaline, Bobby separated himself from the raging Van Hooky. Bobby kept running and made it all the way back to his house without breaking stride. Elated with a newfound sense of courage, he forgot all about Mr. Freed and his impending swats. Later that afternoon, Bobby met up with O'Hara. Over a couple of hot dogs and a fair helping of mayonnaise, the two talked of how Bobby's courage would be legend for centuries to come. The next day, Bobby went to mass as
Still is.
The next day, Bobby went to mass as he did every Sunday morning to appease his father, who insisted it was good for a young boy. He found it hard to stay awake that early morning, and even harder to pay attention. The routine was the same as always. Mass began with a few cold and empty hymns from some time during the Middle Ages that gave you as many chills as the castles in which they were composed. The priest of the church then shared principles of dedication and self-discipline, while a horde of nuns who possessed a sense of right and wrong as black and white as the dresses they wore swept the congregation with eyes peeled for the slightest wrong committed by the children in attendance. It was too much for Bobby. He didn't care for any of it, and for what he could tell, it didn't care much for him. So he would duck away and hide himself in a small cubbyhole he had discovered in the back of the church. Tucked inside a narrow corridor created between two outer walls of the church, the cubby was small, damp, and dark, but it beat going to mass. Each week, Bobby would wait there until service finished, then he would grab a church bulletin before he left. So if his father ever asked him how it went, Bobby could just hand the bulletin to him and say, "Here, see for yourself." Bobby stalked the cubbyhole with necessary supplies. A yo-yo he nabbed from his older brother, a stack of Mad magazines, a box of Twinkies, and a green spiral notebook his father had given him as a prayer journal. But as Bobby arrived at Mass this particular Sunday morning, he actually considered attending the service. He figured it might benefit him to get on God's good side before facing Mr. Freed the next day. Maybe if he got right with God, the big man would come to his aid. Maybe he would send a tornado or an earthquake or a swarm of locusts, the rapture, anything that would cancel school and save him from the wrath of Mr. Freed.
Bugs are our friends.
But Bobby quickly dismissed the idea because from what he knew, God was just as strict as Mr. Freed. It would take more than a morning of repentance to make up for Bobby's history of mischief. So as he did every Sunday,
Get ready.
Bobby snuck away to his cubbyhole and spent the entire time reading his magazines. Monday morning came upon Bobby quicker than he thought possible. The adrenaline from his run-in with Van Hooky had worn off and the familiar weight of dread hung on his shoulders. But as Bobby was getting ready, he suddenly had an idea. He tore open his drawers, pulled out every pair of underwear he owned, and put them on. He didn't stop there either. He then went to the garage, ripped up a couple of boxes, and stuffed them between pairs of his underwear. Stuffed the cardboard between pairs of his underwear. His jeans were too small to fit around his heavily padded bottom, so Bobby ran into older brother's room and stole a pair of jeans. When he slid them on, they fit perfectly. This might just work, he thought. Bobby had to waddle around school the whole day leading up to Mr. Freed's class, but he figured it was well worth the trouble. Finally, Mr. Freed's class period arrived, and Bobby scooted into class, half sitting, half standing at his desk as the teacher walked in. Mr. Freed's locked eyes with Bobby and nodded. It was time to face the music. Without a word, he followed Mr. Freed into a side room. Bobby leaned over, and Mr. Freed, switch in hand, cocked back his arm and prepared to strike.
Okay, it took me to the principal's office.
Is that where they would give the swats?
Yeah. You had to have a witness, and then
he
had this big paddle, and it had to be registered. I mean, it had to be a little regulation. It had holes in it.
Yeah, regulation child abuse.
You hear the wind come through there. So, but I think you got it.
Bobby gritted his teeth and prepared for impact. Slap. Bobby heard the crack of the switch.
It was not a slap. It was a kapow, not a slap.
Bobby heard the crack of the switch, but to his great joy, he didn't feel a thing. The 8 pairs of underwear and 6 layers of cardboard had done their job. Not wanting Mr. Freed to know his punishment was ineffective, Bobby let out his best and most convincing yelp. Mr. Freed raised his hand and swung again. Again, Bobby heard the slap of the switch, but felt nothing. "Oh, Mr. Freed, please have mercy," Bobby whimpered, impressed at his own acting abilities. Mr. Freed continued to dish out a heavy dose of punishment as Bobby continued to feign pain, even so going so far as to muster up tears. After a considerable amount of swats, Mr. Freed let up. "All right, Bobby, you can head back to class," Mr. Freed said, with an uncharacteristic hint of compassion. "Okay, I'm really sorry, Mr. Freed," Bobby said with a convincing.
Probably both of them really smart.
Yeah. I'm really sorry, Mr. Freed, Bobby said with a convincing but entirely inauthentic sniffle. Still whimpering, Bobby limped back into the classroom. As Mr. Freed stayed back for a moment to return his switch to its proper place, "Bobby, are you okay?" O'Hara asked emphatically. Bobby cracked a grin. He hits like a girl." The whole class was silent and in awe. O'Hara needed an explanation. "But how?" "I'm wearing an entire drawer of underwear," Bobby had been whispering at first, but to keep Mr. Freed from hearing him in the other room. But as he continued to brag, he slowly lost control of his volume. "He thought I was hurting. I didn't feel a darn thing. I told you I could." He stopped mid-sentence as a sudden change in the visage of the class altered him. Altered around him. Their expression of elation and awe had melted into looks of horror. Bobby felt a cold chill run across his back. Slowly, Bobby turned and looked over his shoulder, meeting the eyes of Mr. Freed, who was now standing in the doorway just behind him. Arms crossed, a scowl on his face. Bobby stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. Save it, Hartley, Mr. Freed said. Swats again tomorrow. Bobby dropped his head in defeat.
So, what's that say? Well, in review, you mix the band Hooky and O'Hara's story, which was a distraction you handle later.
Yeah.
We're talking about trust, and I'm going to talk about trust in the next generation. But what hits you with this story, because it's Mr. Freed, and this is absolutely true. I mean, there's the principal's office was down the hall, and there was a SWAT thing, and I did put the underwear. It wasn't my older brother; it was my older sister. Some blue jeans, they wore blue jeans back then. My older brother was littler than I was, But it doesn't matter at all. And then I was dismayed. I can still feel that feeling to think this guy can hit a golf ball 300 yards. Back then, that was amazing, and it was totally absorbed in the cardboard. And they had that glass in front of me. The whole, from the floor to the ceiling, you just go by Baptiste, and that's my junior high.
Yeah.
Now it's a storehouse, some kind. But anyhow, we can see in the principal's office, he'd say, "We got to move you back," because I launched the last guy into the parking lot. So there's plated glass. So this is as much a story about Mr. Freed.
Yeah.
But he just seemed like he didn't like students at all,
Right.
Because you just half crossed him or said something funny or out of time, and he'd say, "Check it."
Checky.
And he had this high-pitched voice for an incredible, tough guy. But Checky, which means a half a grade, test grade, F. So the only way I passed the class was he had taught us about aeronautics, and then he gave us an airplane. We had to design it.
Oh, right, the paper airplane.
Paper airplane. So he calls out my name, and I'm in the top of a tree. And he said,
yeah, because it has to fly a certain...
4 seconds.
Oh, it has to fly for an amount of time.
Yeah. So I throw it, that first one, and you get 2 chances. And the thing goes, shoot, boom. And
so you're up in the tree.
I'm way up there, man.
And then it just immediately, you think that you game the system.
Yeah.
And it immediately dives to the ground.
Yeah. And he just ignores I'm up in the tree. So the second one, I take and I throw it, and our parking lot sloped down. I mean, there must have been some angels that got under that thing, because it almost hit the ground like 3 or 4 times, and it was 11 seconds. You try and do that. That was one of the things that you remember, and that was kind of the supreme accomplishment in my whole life.
Yeah.
So, I think
for me, it was the Y2K.
Yes, for me, that was that. So tell me what.
Well, okay, so this is maybe not, but what I'm just remembering, because I'm just remembering writing this, and it was really interesting because, so Andrew Butler, which the first chapter in the book is all about Andrew Butler and meaning him, but Andrew Butler during this time, he was back in Kansas City for a little while, and he's my really good friend who's been my friend for a long time. Mine too. Yeah.
We hit it off. I mean, it was a little tough at first, but we'll read that story. We'll break it into 2-3 parts if we get it's long. But this one, you gotta listen through every detail.
Yeah. But anyway, so Andrew, I'm in Hawaii, and Andrew is in Virginia at this time, and I'm calling him, and we're talking, and he starts telling me about these headaches that he's getting, and I just think that he's in law school, he's in pre-law, doing some pre-law work at the time, and I'm just thinking, well, he's probably stressed out of his mind, and just is getting these headaches from just this level of stress. So this is right before I start writing the book. And then we're in California for a little bit, and I remember calling him about 6 months later or something like that, and we're talking on the phone, and he's talking about how he's consistently getting these headaches, and he's getting them at the same time, and even on Saturdays and Sundays, and so I'm like, well, you might need to go get that checked out. And he didn't go get it checked out because I said anything, but I just remember being for the first time, I was like, oh, well, that might be a problem or something. Yeah. But he's 21-year-old, And so he goes in and he gets an MRI, and he has I think it was like I don't know if it was how big it was, but he had a large brain tumor. And at least golf ball. Yeah. Size brain tumor. And it's just like, oh my goodness, you have no idea. So he flies back to Kansas City right when I'm flying back to Kansas City and living back in Kansas City because there's his family's here, and the University of Kansas Hospital has this big, this great brain surgery system. But so they start setting up, and he has about 3 months where he's going to, or like 2 months before he is going to go in for surgery, because it's one of those things. It's a brain tumor. They don't know. You can't really do a brain biopsy because it's just, maybe they're better at it now, but this is 9 years ago, and so they're not going to open them up until they're ready for surgery. So he has 2 months, and they're talking, if it's malignant, it could be. I mean, it could be a really serious deal, and you're. So I remember, but he's back in Kansas City for over the summer for a while, and I have just written 8 chapters of the book or something like that, in these early chapters of the book. And I wasn't really great at editing at that time. I still am not great at editing and doing that. And you just need another person. So he says, well, I'll do it. And so I send him, a kind of first draft of the book. And he spends several months just doing this for free. I mean, he didn't, it was a labor of love. And so I remember even talking with him about this chapter, because this was one of the first chapters. And we wanted, because when we sent it to the publishers, we could choose 3 chapters to kind of send, like just a little taste of it. And I remember us talking about which one we should do. But he was just so instrumental in getting this book edited together. So when I'm reading this, I can even remember some of the language that he helped me kind of get to, and he was just fantastic at doing a lot of the editing. And so I don't know exactly if this applies totally to, but just the trust that I had for him, and just, I don't know, the role that he was able to play in my life. And so then he goes into surgery. He's also that summer he was going to get married, and they had to postpone the wedding because he had to go into brain surgery. I remember talking to his fiance and just like how hard that was for her, and it was just a crazy time. But he ends up going into surgery and gets the tumor removed, and it was benign, and it was a whole long day process. And even though it was like benign, there was still concern of like, brain surgery is a serious thing, But they got all of it, and so now he's a lawyer in New York now. He's doing fantastic. He has 3 kids now, and 3 kids, and he got married like a month later after the surgery, and got married up in Canada. And I remember it's just like, it was a beautiful time, and it was a beautiful time where he was able to play just this really important role in my life in the book, and I was able to play an important role in just like, we had been both off to college for 4 or 5 years and hadn't seen each other, and so we both were able to like come back, exactly, during like a really critical time in his life and in my life, and I mean, we still remain really, really good friends and stuff. So I mean, maybe not trusting the next generation, but just trusting the people around you, and being able to, like, in the hardest times, see how much,
cream came out of him. I never knew that. I mean, you had told me he had helped edit, but I didn't realize what the circumstance was.
Yeah.
And just, like you said, trust the people around you, and trust, with Andrew, we remember that huge prayer meeting we had for him, and it was a time where such compassion, for him. I mean, everybody just loved him immensely, and to see his fiance there, and her
Yeah.
go through that, and just to see them trust and
Yeah, she was unbelievable during that time.
Yeah.
I mean, they're young too, and you
Yeah.
look and you think, okay, well, when you're that age, getting married is such a big deal. But getting married to someone who I remember having a conversation where they talked to her. It's like, hey, if this is malignant, I mean, you have 2 years to live, and that's just. And she never for a second was she like, oh well, I'm gonna
that's
not
amazing.
be. And I mean, he was great too, like
Yeah.
handling that, being a 21-year-old and being about to get married, about to graduate your undergraduate, and go into law school, and then all of a sudden you have a brain tumor, and it's
Yeah.
like, so
Somehow you just superseded Mr. Freed's story.
sorry.
No, I'm good. No, that means more to me. Just to see somebody in their own plight be able to love you
Yeah,
and love me
yeah,
and love the story, and hopefully, just trusting circumstances to turn out good.
Yeah.
It just proves, just proving that you get a pessimistic, critical. You just let the weight of the world get on you, and I could tell that they were definitely feeling it,
yeah.
but just
Yeah.
they got tender, and for him to serve like that, just
Well, and I think
that gives me trust in the next generation.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
knowing that. I mean, just
Yeah.
you don't have to have many examples to that level. It's just one kindness here or there. And what I see with trust in the next generation, and hopefully I wasn't interrupting you, and you're part of the next generation. We really love you on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We love you all the time. McKenna, you can clean up a little bit, and I got legal tender. Okay, gotta get back. We're talking people on this thing. Okay, love you. Well, I'm just, with this story, like you with Andrew, was me with Mike O'Hara.
Yeah.
Just later on, you tell how he fought Van Hooky for me. Didn't really fight. He just stood in the way and
Yeah, he took the
took the blows.
for because that's what this story is leading. I mean, the next two stories, a lot of these stories are kind of independent, but some of them, like the Willie story and some of that, they kind of string together. And this story was really about leading into your relationship with O'Hara and just how much he was a friend to you. And and I think that's, and Andrew was that friend to me, and we were able to.
And I would say O'Hara was a better friend to me.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you see other people have. You always want to love well, even when you're not loved.
Yeah,
Your
he was a
perception.
better friend to you than you were to him.
I would say, seasons, but primarily all the time.
Yeah,
He was just.
he was.
But with Mr. Freed, like they couldn't give swats tomorrow at the end of it because I had embarrassed him and tied his shoes and all that. Well, but I mean, he had to discipline me, but he couldn't legally give me swats for a week. So instead, he gave me some kind of discipline. I got to remember what it was.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what it was. I wasn't a track guy,
Yeah.
but I had to serve at the track meets because he helped lead the track team.
Gotcha.
And so
Of course he did.
back to Billy Allgaier.
Yeah.
Billy Allgaier did pole vault.
Ah.
Billy Allgaier, red hair, freckles.
He was the banana bandit.
Yeah,
that
the banana
talked about
bandit.
in this story.
Early,
Who
you
would
got to
throw
listen
the?
to all these stories. So, but
It's already been about 40 minutes. We
okay,
should
so I'll
probably-
finish with this
yeah.
real quick. Is Billy gets out there to do the pole vault, takes off his sweats, and he's running. And I said, Billy, look down. And he don't have any shorts on. He's just got these little jocksters and he's probably 9th grade, 8th grade, something like that. He just runs down the hill.
He just keeps running.
Running down the hill. So he's down the hill. There's a slope right on the other side. And he's screaming, somebody bring him his pants. And nobody does. So we we leave. He's probably still down that hill, but back to Mr. Freed, that whatever discipline, I had to go down to the principal's office, and wasn't as bad as SWATs, you know. But I came back up to the room, and he was talking to me, to the class, and he said, if our future is left to ones like Hartley, and then there was this pause. He said, I think we'll be okay. And he just really actually changed me.
If our future is left to
ones like Hartley,
I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. I mean, when those people believe in your long life. And so he gave me, it was a tough time in my family.
Yeah.
You know, my mom was bedridden at that time. So I was acting out. Part of that was obnoxiousness. Part of it was just, you know, acting out. But he gave me that year the Outstanding Athlete Award. Actually, I got it 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, but he was always in charge of it with another coach. And it wasn't a statement necessarily about my athletics, but because I remember, you know, the first year I got it, I was so surprised that I tried to go up there on the stage because it's a school assembly, and I got my dad's shoes on because, you know, I don't want to sound like we're incredibly poor, but I probably couldn't find mine, put his on. And I
tripping over yourself.
Yeah, I trip and land flat, and the whole crowd laughs, and he laughs, and it's just an enjoyable moment versus that Claude Hartley. But then he calls, you know, just the trust in the next generation is there's this coach's cage.
Yeah.
And so you got about a foot between the ceiling and the top of the cage, which was like a wrought iron fence, or fence around the yard. But it's good, 8-9 feet off the ground. And then you just got a foot in between. And so he calls me out of class. I hear the intercom. Hartley, meet Mr. Freed down in Coach's Steel. So I go down there, and he said, anybody around? And I said, no. And he said, well, look around. So I look around, nobody's there. So he says, go for it. My keys are locked in there. So I'm just up and over, you know, and back over, and I just thought, man, he trusts me, you know, and he got to keep a secret too, because he's lost keys, and so then you got to know each other, the lighter side of each other, you know, and he was one that I kept in touch with for a long time. There were about 3 teachers that I did, and he was for a long time. So that's trusting others, awesome, Jen. And that's trusting the next generation. So just a little bit of encouragement. And, you know, God speaks of it, that about our children being like full of grow plants, as I said, and that, you know, that fathers and sons will come together, and the sons and the daughters, and the mothers and the fathers. And so that's what we get to hope in. Okay. Love you guys.